So his messages will come after the presentation. So put him last.
Okay, hold on. So it's Minister. Good morning. Where's Pimmy? Miriam. Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Dr. Dion George. Salga Chairperson, Councillor Kinalimang Pukunzi. The Commissioners of the Presidential Climate Commission. Executive Director at the PCC, Dr. Crispin Olver. Chief Director for International Climate Change Relations and Reporting at DFFE, Ms. Pemi Makasela. Acting Chief Operations Officer at the PCC, Mr. Dumsani Ngumalo. CEO at NBI, Shamila Subramani. Stakeholders who are joining us in Johannesburg in the room, as well as those who are joining us virtually. Members of the media and distinguished guests. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome you to the COP29 Stakeholder Consultation. My name is Tobile Zulu Mulubi, and I am the Media Liaison Officer in the Office of the Ministry at the DFFE. Welcome. To get our proceedings underway, I would like to call the Honourable Minister to please step forward for opening remarks.
Distinguished guests, Councillor Ki Na Lemang Pukunsi, Salga Chair, Dr. Crispin Olver, Executive Director, Presidential Climate Commission, PCC, Mr. Alex McNamara, Head of Environment, National Business Initiative. Good morning. I want to start by congratulating Dr. Olver, who has been appointed by the President as the Deputy Chairperson of the Commission from the 1st of January 2025. Congratulations. I feel honored to deliver these opening remarks at our national stakeholder consultations for the UNFCCC COP29, which will be held in Baku, Azerbaijan from the 11th to the 22nd of November 2024. Your presence here today underscores our shared commitment to shaping South Africa's negotiating position as we approach this critical juncture in global climate action. We greatly value the insights and contributions of all stakeholders, from government, industry, business and labor, to non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, and our academic and research communities. Each of you brings an invaluable perspective as we align our national climate action with global ambitions, and as we prepare for COP29, your active participation today is essential. Ladies and gentlemen, COP28 marked a pivotal moment in international climate diplomacy as we transitioned from negotiating the Paris Agreement to implementing its commitments. Monumental achievements, including the conclusion of the first global stocktake, the activation of funding arrangements to address loss and damage, with the establishment of a dedicated fund under the UNFCCC, and the setting of targets for the global goal on adaptation. As we look ahead to COP29, we recognize that we are approaching another decisive milestone. This conference presents one of the final opportunities for countries to signal their intentions for new and enhanced nationally determined contributions, NDCs, ahead of the 2025 deadline for the second NDC cycle. These plans will determine whether we collectively fulfill the ambitions set out in the Paris Agreement. Therefore, COP29 must build consensus drive momentum, and ensure that every nation is on a sustainable path towards a net zero economy. The incoming COP29 presidency has set ambitious priorities. A two-day summit at the start of the conference will bring together global leaders to raise awareness and accelerate climate action. Beyond the summit, the presidency is finalizing the new collective quantified goal on finance, the NCQG, a matter of great importance for developing economies like ours. Moreover, there is a pressing need for large-scale financial support to enable developing economy nations to meet their climate targets and progress towards sustainable, low-carbon development. The current financing mechanisms have proved insufficient in scale and effectiveness, highlighting the urgency for a new financing model. COP29 presents an opportunity to advocate for innovative and improved financial frameworks that can mobilize substantial resources more efficiently. Such a model must ensure predictable, accessible, and adequate funding and address the shortcomings of existing systems and empowering countries like South Africa to implement ambitious climate action. COP29 will in addition aim to resolve outstanding issues under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Finalizing the operational detail of both market-based and non-market-based mechanisms will be crucial. These cooperative frameworks are vital, not only for reducing emissions globally, but also for fostering international collaboration that can spur innovation and help developing economy countries achieve their climate objectives. By establishing transparent and robust mechanisms under Article 6, we can enable countries to work together more effectively. This cooperation will facilitate technology transfer, attract additional finance, and support sustainable development initiatives. For South Africa and other developing nations, resolving these issues is essential to unlocking new opportunities for climate action, enhancing our capabilities, and accelerating progress towards our NDCs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is further crucial that COP29 accelerates the application of financial, technical, and capacity-building resources that will enable developing economy countries to meet the conditional targets outlined in the NDCs and National Adaptation Plans, the NAPs. For South Africa and other developing economies, these resources are instrumental in our efforts to mitigate climate risks, enhance resilience, and pursue inclusive, sustainable development. The new collective quantified goal on finance must provide a clear and ambitious quantification of the financial support needed by developing economy countries to implement their climate commitments and development plans, including the NDCs, the NAPs, low emission development strategies, and other relevant policy frameworks, as well as key multilateral goals endorsed since Glasgow. This goal should also reflect inclusive, just transition pathways aligned with each country's nationally determined socio-economic development priorities. Access to finance must be significantly scaled up to offer new, additional, and predictable funding that is fit for purpose. Specifically, we need grants and highly concessional financing that can be effectively allocated to create enabling environments for rapid investments. By de-risking investments and creating new asset classes for clean technologies, we can unlock and leverage amounts of public and private finance. As we move forward, COP29 presents an opportunity to build on the progress we've made and to confront the complexities that remain. Climate finance, adaptation, and international cooperation will be at the heart of our discussions. South Africa stands ready to play a central role in ensuring these critical issues are addressed, and we will continue to advocate for the needs of vulnerable populations, particularly women and youth, who are disproportionately affected by the impact of climate change. The task ahead is significant and requires our collective resolve. COP29 is a moment for the global community to transform our shared ambitions into concrete actions. By uniting our efforts, we can ensure that the commitments we make today lead to a safer, more sustainable, and more equitable future for generations to come. I will be co-chairing discussions on mitigation, together with my counterpart from Norway, and will head the South African delegation to COP29. I look forward to hearing your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. All right, we're doing very well on time, so I'm very happy about that. Our next speaker is Ms. Pemi Kasela, who's the Chief Director of International Climate Change Relations and Reporting from the DFFE. Please welcome her.
Good morning, Honorable Minister George, Councillor Pukunze, Dr. Oliver, NBI representatives, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, good morning. As already said, my name is Pemi Kasela, and I will be giving a presentation on our position as we go to COP29, which will take place in Azerbaijan, in Baku, from the 11th to the 22nd of November, 2024. If I could get the next slide, please. The UNFCCC COP29 will comprise of 3 governing bodies, which is the 29th Conference of the Parties, which is COP29, the 19th Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and the 6th Conference of the Parties. I'm told that my vertical challengement is an issue. So I'll try. Can you all see me now? Well, it's the challenge. What can I say? The 3 sessions, it will also have the session of the governing bodies that will precede it by the 2 subsidiary bodies. And that's the subsidiary body for the implementation and subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, what we call SUBSTA. If we can go to the next slide. Let me try and see. Now, in terms of the background, we had COP28 that took place in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, and that marked a shift to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It concluded the first global stocktake on climate effort, operationalized the funding for loss and damage, including the new dedicated fund under the UNFCCC. This was a historic milestone as this was concluded on the first day of the COP. Parties also agreed to targets for the global goal on adaptation and its framework for climate resilience against climate impact. Now, moving to COP29 should focus on intensifying efforts to quantify resources for developing countries to meet ambitious climate targets. There will also be a World Leaders Climate Summit, and this is something that has been happening in the previous COPs, and this will take place from the 12th to the 13th of November in Baku. Now, in terms of what the COP29 presidency's vision is, they have announced that there will be the appointment of ministerial pairs, as the Minister George has already said that he will be co-facilitating mitigation with his counterpart from Norway. There will also be the new collective quantifiable goal, which is the NCQG, which also has its ministerial pair. The adaptation also has its ministerial pair as well. And the purpose of this is to help guide and inform political consultation on these important topics. COP presidency has also announced that there are 2 pillars of the COP vision. And here, the first pillar will be on enhanced enabling actions. So here it will be looking at finance and the new collective quantifiable goal, which is what we call the NCQG, on the fair and ambitious NCQG. Article 6, which is what we call cooperative approaches, the finalization of the negotiation on Article 6.1 and 6.4 on loss and damage. And on Pillar 2, it will be focusing on enhancing ambition. And this will focus on the national determined contribution, the NDC and mitigation, the national adaptation plans and adaptation, and the biennial transparency reports and transparency. And these biennial transparency reports are due by end of December this year. Now, in terms of our expectation going into COP, firstly, for us, it's important that we have a strong leadership and political engagement that will be very crucial in delivering ambitious outcomes to meet the goals of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. It remains critical for developed countries to take the lead up to 2030 as per the Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, and the Dubai outcomes. The new collectified quantifiable goals should reflect the financial support needed by the developing countries for their nationally determined contribution, their national adaptation plans, the low emission development plans, and the national development frameworks. And the NCQG should also be reflective of inclusive just transition pathways in line with parties' individually national determined socio-economic development priorities. So we're saying this COP is going to be a finance COP, and that's what we would like to see. Now, in terms of our recommended position as we go to the COP on adaptation, South Africa supports ways to advance work on the global goal on adaptation, which is the UAE Belém work program. So we'd like to see the development of indicators to be able to assess this global goal on adaptation. On Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, South Africa supports the adoption of the guidance of Article 6.2 to operationalize cooperative approaches. We also welcome the finalization of the platform for non-market approaches with expectation for funding proposal from countries. On the NCQG, as already said, it must be quantifiable, the financial support needed by developing countries to implement their NDC, their national adaptation plans, their low emission development plans, and other relevant framework. On the Just Transition work program, South Africa will push for no one-size-fits-all approach. We believe that there are different just transition, and this should be taken into account. The implementation must be non-prescriptive and non-confrontational, and support countries in defining their just transition pathways. On mitigation work program, this was a mitigation work program that was originally developed to exchange best practices, views on how to deal with the ambition and the NDC. And we're saying it's important that we preserve and respect the original mandate and scope of the decision. And it should not be a platform where decisions are making, but rather a place where it is sharing of views in the mitigation work program. Hence, we're saying the mandate should be maintained and the scope of decision for CMA4, which is the decision of the conference of the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. On loss and damage fund, we're saying finance must be new, additional, predictable, accessible, and adequate to support the developing countries, and it should be separate from adaptation finance and not increase debt burdens. On the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, we require a clear understanding of the capacities and coordination needs of all developing countries regarding preparing for, responding, and building to resilience against loss and damage associated with extreme, slow onset events, including through recovery and rehabilitation. This would be important, especially with the floods that we've had, so that's what we would like to see. On transparency, we support for transparency should be provided through multilateral and bilateral channels that is sufficient and predictable resources to support the building of sustainable institutional capacity for regular reporting in developing countries. Now, to conclude, a successful COP outcomes is one that reassesses the global solidarity to implement commitments and obligations already undertaken. The pursuit of a balanced outcome should be understood in the context of 1.5 degrees social pathways and the importance of sustainable development, poverty eradication in the transition. COP must be a real finance COP that delivers ambition and outcome-based new collective quantifiable goal that supports developing countries' transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient development. The quantum, which is what is going to be a bone of contestation of the mobilization and provision for new goals, should be consummate to the ambition of action. COP29 outcome must also redress the adaptation finance imbalance. Adaptation must be financed at the same level as mitigation. South Africa must focus on the implementation and the means to facilitate that at COP29. And South Africa stands ready to play a constructive role for the success of COP29. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pemi, for that comprehensive presentation on South Africa's negotiating mandate at this year's COP. I think that was very well done, and I'd just like us to give her another round of applause. All right, we will now hear from various stakeholders, South African stakeholders, who will share their expectations and hopes for the team that will be negotiating at this year's COP. They'll just share their expectations and their hopes for this year's COP and what they would like to see come out of the COP. First up, we will start with Councillor Kinalimang Pukunzi, who is the South African Local Government Association Chair. Welcome, Councillor Pukunzi.
Thanks, Program Director. Let me greet the Deputy Chair, outgoing Deputy Chair in absentia, Dr. Vali Musa, greet the Deputy, greet the Minister for DFFE, Honorable Dion George, greet the ED of Commission, Dr. Oliver, and greet all of you, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, in your eminency. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It seems as if you are not happy. It's like I'm addressing the community of the municipality where I'm coming from, because if they are not happy, when you greet them, they will never say yes. So I believe this is a different audience. Honorable Minister, delegates, esteemed guests, it is evident that climate change poses huge risk for our country and the world. We are witnessing deadly floods in many countries in various continents on a daily basis. Many developing countries, including our own in the continent of Africa, are highly susceptible to the climate risk and extreme events, such as severe drought and frequent heavy rains that results in a deadly floods that put basic services under threat and cause damages on infrastructure that strain public budgets. If not addressed, climate-related risk could jeopardize our economic growth and financial stability, while disproportionately affecting the poor and the vulnerable groups, majority of whom are women, children, and elderly, and those living with disabilities. Given the continued and increasing pressure of climate change, acting at the local level is an urgent matter. Local and sub-regional governance across the world and in South Africa Both rural and urban are in the front line of climate action, but they are unable to shoulder the massive infrastructure investment and adaptation efforts required for sustainable low to no emission and climate resilient development. As a frontliner respondents to the effects of global warming, local and sub-regional governments have a challenging task of building resilient communities. However, a low-carbon resilient society requires a structural change of enormous scale and speed. This requires a joint action by all sectors of society and at all levels of governance. Coordinating these efforts and ensuring their coherence within a multi-level and multilateral governance system is key to driving forward effective, efficient, and ambitious climate actions. Honorable Minister and delegates, in this context of growing political debate internationally, alongside ever-rising temperatures, COP29 is more important than ever for bridging these divides and getting the world back on track for 1.05 degrees Celsius. The UNFCCC COP is central to tackling climate change as the only platform which brings together all countries in the world to discuss the collaborative on climate actions. However, as local government, we remain concerned that the world is not on track to achieve the SDGs. Risk overshooting the 1.5 degrees Celsius objective of the Paris Agreement is failing to adapt in human history. The window of time until COP30 is the most consequential as parties are working on a new national determined contributions due in 2025 for defending against climate breakdown and keeping multilateralism alive. COP28 recognized the importance of multi-level action and the role of local government and subnational governments in advancing global action. We applaud this progress as we now move into the implementation of the United Arab Emirates consensus. To this effect, we urge South Africa as a trailblazer and a leader in implementing multi-level climate action and multi-level national determined contribution. Join the 72 parties who have endorsed the coalition of high ambition multi-level partnership that is called CHAMP, in an initiative which aims to pursue efforts across all levels of governments for enhanced NDCs by 2025, and DFFE and sector partners to support the Town Hall COPs initiative that aims to amplify local climate perspective within broader climate processes, thus connecting local climate action to national through the new Climate Change Act and the global processes. This process encourages mayors to convene their town hall COPs as an innovative approach to basically bringing the COP to the local levels, where local government, administration, politicians, communities, experts, local stakeholders, and civil society come together to assess and discuss climate mitigation, adaptation, finance, and loss and damage in the consent format. As organized local government, together with our partners, we see ourselves as implementation partners and keen to support the development, financing, and implementation of ambitious NDCs, national adaptation plans, long-term strategies, and other key strategies ahead of 2025. As a result, we urge the South African negotiation team to work hard in providing leadership together with other parties to ensure that COP29 builds on COP28 joint statement on climate, nature, and people and connect with coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to foster stronger synergies between mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and nature-based solutions, food security, land degradation, biodiversity, protection and restoration, and health, as well as sustainable development goals, thereby ensuring that no one is left behind in the global fight against climate change. And we also saying that we need to deliver an ambitious new collective quantified goal on climate finance that enables a just, equitable, and a well-funded transition across all levels of government, including direct access for local and other subnational governments, in connection with the reform of global finance architecture and multilateral development banks. We also stress the importance of inclusive just transition pathways that are reflective of the country's individual socio-economic development priorities. We also saying that we must ensure that grants rather than loans and concessional terms are prioritized so that the debt burden on local and other subnational government is not exacerbated. We also are saying that we formalize local and other subnational voices in the relevant UN agendas and strengthen their engagement in the UN intergovernmental bodies as suggested in the revised version of the Pact for the Future. We also saying that we put the spotlight on the adaptation and secure the necessary resources by being specific on how countries will deliver on the global goal on adaptation and put in place measures to cope with and minimize the unavoidable impacts of climate change we are currently battling with at the local level. In closing, Minister, we are saying that we recognize that the COPs cannot substitute the progress in national policy making and implementation, but they are a primary platform for building international consensus on how to address the ever-worsening climate crisis. All parties must be committed to set up and contribute towards building climate resilient, putting people and nature first in pursuit of a resilient world where we don't just survive climate shocks and stress, but thrive despite all of them. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pukunzi. I think local government is a key voice in this discussion because they operate at the local level, and so they're quite at the heartbeat at seeing the effects that climate change has on communities. So thank you for that presentation. All right, next up we have got a representative from business, Happy Kambule from Business Unity South Africa. Please step forward. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Minister, EDs, all protocols observed, and political leadership. I think, first and foremost, thank you for this opportunity to reflect on the positioning for South Africa. And I just wanted to indicate, at least from the outset, is that business has taken quite a leading role in ensuring that the just transition is not only implemented in South Africa, but also is being understood with the view of reaching net zero in 2050. Our position broadly for COP is more or less threefold, with a view as well of trying to indicate what we think is a credible outcome, at least for this COP, outside of all the other myriad of issues. I mean, this COP is going to be quite an important one, not only for the NQCG, but also for some of the other development, or rather the other building blocks of the negotiations as we move forward. So for us, COP arrives at a pivotal time when all regions are grappling with increasing evident impacts of climate change. This is compounded by heightened geopolitical tensions, trade disputes, and growing divisions between parties over issues such as carbon border adjustment mechanisms, especially between developed and developing countries. Many nations are constrained by limited resources, hindering decisive climate action, and developed countries in particular have faltered on their financial commitments with the attempts to reframe climate finance discussions. For us, priorities for this COP is that we need to focus on the special circumstances of developing countries and adequately look at predictable and at scale support for implementation of climate action and just transition. As COP serves as a key platform for advancing the UNFCCC negotiations and also allows for the opening of broader conversations about transforming the global financial architecture, as the MEC has also indicated and the Mayor has also indicated. This includes reforming multilateral development mechanisms as well as international finance institutions to better support sustainable development. For us, the NCQG, it's always a weird acronym, but the NCQG is actually one pivotal issue. And the main thing here is that we have to have quality finance, predictable finance. It must be larger and more comprehensive than the previous finance goal, and it must reflect the needs of developing countries for both mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage efforts, and the transition pathways that need to be undertaken. The new goal must include scaled up financial resources while ensuring that funds are adequate, predictable, and aligned with the needs of the most vulnerable nations. And for BUSA and the private sector more broadly, we strongly support the principles that the developed countries or developed economies must provide financial, technological, and capacity building assistance. And we stress that the support should not place undue financial burdens or impose unjust conditions on developing countries. Crucially, climate finance should not exacerbate the current debt crisis in developing countries. And ultimately, we understand that if climate finance were to be provided, we will find ourselves actually becoming more ambitious and implementing more innovative approaches to addressing the climate question. The current climate financial flows have been insufficient, non-additional, and shifting the burden, especially the disproportionate burden of the cost of climate action to developing economies, despite their limited fiscal capacity. Recent proposals for what is called the carbon border tax adjustment mechanisms, targeting goods imported from developing countries to fund developed country party climate obligations, are particularly concerning and disappointing. And from a view from what we are currently engaged in as the B20, as well as the global advocacy program around business and climate, we find that this is counter to issues related to fair trade as well as market access. From BUSA's perspective, climate finance must be concessional, primarily grant-based, and free from conditionalities. This approach would enable countries like South Africa to launch beneficial projects and attract private sector investments. Estimates for adaptation costs for Africa range between 259 to 407 billion per year, United States dollars, USDs, and not rands, with an annual average need of about 26 to 41 billion. We believe a new scaled-up, quantified, long-term financial goal is essential based on the needs of developing countries and underpinned by a collectively negotiated roadmap. As BUSA, we did not take a view as to what are the scale or the size as well as the sources where they need to come from. We believe that as this is a common but differentiated responsibility, the burden sits on the developed countries. Developed countries must fulfill their financial commitments under Article 9.1, including the 100 billion per year, per annum target. Failing to meet the pre-20 commitments has eroded trust among parties in the multilateral process, and the future support of this new and additional collective goal must avoid repackaging existing funds. Developing countries cannot be expected to resort to loans with onerous conditions which infringe on the policy space and worsening the debt crisis. For South Africa, we do understand and we do maintain that the priority must be adaptation, and our understanding in terms of even to the extent of the NDC is that we'll be focusing on refining and ensuring that the adaptation goal and our adaptation targetings within South Africa is further enhanced. But specific to the GGA and the adaptation gaps that have been identified through numerous processes, we believe that adaptation is a national project priority for South Africa, requiring substantial resources to build capacity and reduce vulnerability in the face of climate impacts. The private sector has been heavily impacted by climate risks such as extreme weather events, also requires a strengthened adaptive capacity. These measures are essential not only for industry and supply chain resilience, but for the well-being of workers, communities, and ecosystems facing the brunt of climate change. Business in South Africa strongly supports the inclusion of a set of indicators relating to the strengthening of adaptive capacity within the private sector in developing countries with a specific significant emphasis on the physical climate risk. On the just transition, we understand that as South Africa, we've been a pioneer in this issue, and we would like to condone and to endorse the approach that South Africa has been taking on the just transition. For us, the just aspect of the transition has not yet been achieved significantly within the international platform or into the international strata. South Africa must take the lead in defining its unique transition, ensuring alignment with our national interests, development goals, and access to finance. Flexibility is needed to support small, medium, and micro enterprises in this transition. And if leveraged effectively, the just transition offers an opportunity for net zero future that promotes sustainability, inclusivity, and prosperity. Given South Africa's urgent national priorities, especially around energy security, we emphasize the need for international partnerships that provide for both financial and non-financial support. A value chain approach is essential, considering affordability, market access, and meaningful participation from local businesses and SMMEs. In order to unlock investment and inclusive growth in the existing and new green technologies or green industries, a just transition is an imperative. Looking ahead into what is going to be a key defining moment post this COP is the confirmation of the deadline to submit NDCs. For the private sector, there is a recognition for the importance of enhancing the NDC ambition in a responsible manner. This can be achieved by implementing the agreed national emissions trajectory within the ranges specified within the NDC, while refining the just transition pathways. These must be supported by clear financial flows and strategies that address socio-economic challenges. At the same time, increasing the NDC ambition must be done thoughtfully, considering national circumstances and national climate risk, including energy security and economic stability. Enhancing South Africa's NDC should be approached cautiously given the country's development challenges, as well as its climate vulnerability, including physical and transition-related risks. As a decision has not been taken as yet, and the one that is about to be taken will not be taken lightly, we believe that there are profound economic implications in the mid and in the long term. A lower boundary of the lower boundary of the South African NDC range is already acknowledged as internationally fair and ambitious, and is seen as a fair share contribution to the international efforts, and also signals our commitment to addressing climate change despite domestic challenges. On adaptation, there is a pressing need to define a national adaptation goal with a specific set of metrics for tracking progress, where the private sector can play a pivotal role through investments in adaptation initiatives. Moreover, NDCs should highlight technology and capacity gaps, presenting opportunities for private sector involvement in technology transfer and innovation. Key gaps include the technical capacity and financial resources necessary to undertake project preparation and de-risking innovative solutions. Additionally, or rather, in conclusion, a clear monitoring and tracking process for our commitments in terms of how they are implemented in relation to the Paris Agreement is necessary. Therefore, our NDC should have a projected baseline of how far we have come in implementing the mitigation actions as well as the adaptation actions contained in our NDC, which will allow us to be able to demonstrate and reinforce South Africa's role in global efforts. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Kambula. Our next speaker is Thando Lukuko, who's representing the Climate Action Network of South Africa, and he will be speaking on behalf of civil society. As the technical team gets ready to cross over to Thando, I would just like to remind all of our guests who are joining us virtually to please remember to put in any of their questions in the Q&A box, and we will take questions very soon. Thank you. Over to you, Thando.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Can someone please just assist with the video? But whilst we wait for the video to come up, if I may just send my greetings to the Minister, to the DC, Mr. Musa, and to the ED, Dr. Over. Good morning, all. All right. So I guess you just have to bear with the 1 second. There we go. There we go. All right. So yeah, I think. Oh.
Okay. All right. There we go.
We're good. May I continue? Hello.
Yes, you may continue.
Thank you. So yes, I think, we're at a point in this COP race, if you will, where we're kind of seeing a convergence of traditionally opposing views, but where those views are now starting to come together. Particularly ourselves as civil society agree with the submissions that have been made by both our colleagues from government and our colleagues from business, in as far as the need for specifically financing, right, and financing for several subject matters. So if I may quickly just touch on what I believe are some key points for us, and then I'll just wrap, so my submission will be fairly short. On the NCQG, we agree with and support fully the South African position. What we also understand is that the quantum is going to be the biggest challenge that the state is going to face. Civil society, both domestically and internationally, is of the view that we should be able to get the highest amount of money that we can, or quantum that we can.
All right, apologies about that. It seems we're having some technical issues. Whilst the technical team tries to sort that out, may I please make a suggestion to just introduce our next speakers so that the program is not at a standstill. So the next speaker is Mr. Zahir Suleiman, who is going to be speaking on behalf of the youth of South Africa. Shortly after him, we will ask Ms. Yakanim Giako to please step forward to present Minister Dr. George with the statement from the youth.
Honorable Minister, thank you, Program Director as well. Honorable Minister, distinguished guests from the department, and esteemed guests, good morning. My name is Zahir Suleiman. I am 22 years old, and I am a University of Witwatersrand student. Hopefully, as of next week, I will be a University of Witwatersrand graduate. So pray for me. Thank you. I'm here today to deliver youth perspectives and expectations of young people, of South African young people for COP29. I was in the capacity of being a youth delegate for COP28, and hopefully will do so for the same for COP29, and specifically negotiating as part of the Department of Forestry, Fishery and Environment. I want to take this opportunity first and foremost to say that young people come in all of their different varieties. I'm not here to speak on behalf of all youth of South Africa. I'm here to just share some of the constituencies and their inputs towards COP29 and their statements, and we recognize all different various youth efforts towards this Climate Action Summit. So just reflecting on COP28 and what was done in UAE. So we saw the actual largest South African youth delegation, which I think deserves a round of applause. Thank you to the department for that. And we welcomed the UAE consensus, which introduced a phase down of fossil fuels for the first time ever, although this wasn't without much contention from young people given the context. Reflecting, however, the UAE consensus provided us with a roadmap for how we can engage at COP29 and COP30. Despite some challenges and successes, the interconnectedness of of nations in tackling environmental issues was evident, emphasizing the shared responsibility we all bear in safeguarding our planet, and we need to build on this momentum. We recommend a focus on research, policy development, and grassroots activism, and we can bridge the gap between implementation and intention. The conference catalyzes climate change, reminding us that our actions today shape the world that we live for tomorrow. So with regards to the youth statement, we have divided our recommendations into the 5 following areas. These are areas that are particular to the youth and are just transition, NDCs 3.0, climate finance and the NCQG, adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage, and ACE, youth, and gender. On just transition, we, the youth of South Africa, recognize the need for a just transition that is important of South Africa moving towards a low carbon economy. Furthermore, to realize a just transition that does not leave the youth or any stakeholder behind, we urge the state to establish synergy between the JET implementation plan and the just transition framework that emphasizes decisive and distributive justice, restorative justice, and procedural justice. On Decision 1, CMA 4, negotiators are urged to ensure that the work program actively engages a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including workers, indigenous peoples, women, youth, local communities, and marginalized groups. In support of global solidarity, parties should promote global partnerships involving the state, the countries involved in the international partner group, and the private sector, civil society with an emphasis on youth, to mobilize resources, finance, and technical capacity for just transition efforts. And from Article 2.1c, we call for adequate investment flows towards realizing the commitments of financing the just transition by making provision for larger portions and provisions of concessional loans to alleviate the financial burdens carried out by developing countries. In continuation of the just transition, guided by Decision 1 CMA4, parties are encouraged to develop and implement social safety nets, including unemployment benefits, retraining programs, and access to essential services to support workers and communities affected by the transition. On Decision 18 CMA1, negotiators are encouraged to develop robust monitoring systems to track progress on just transition pathways. This should include indicators on social equality, job creation, and protection of vulnerable people. Parties are further encouraged to include detailed reports on the implementation of just transition measures within their biennial transparency reports under the Paris Agreement to ensure accountability and facilitate global tracking of progress. In summation, we are looking for a youth-centric just transition and for policies, international cooperation, social protection, and monitoring that ensures no one group is left behind. On the NDCs, in the upcoming revision of the nationally determined contributions, it is important that South Africa's NDCs are improved to address the urgent needs for climate action, gender equality, and transparent climate finance, ensuring a truly just transition that leaves no one behind. The current NDCs have some notable strengths, but as we move towards the 2025 revision, we need our leaders to step up with bolder actions by strengthening emission reduction targets to effectively align with the 1.5-degree goal and achieve net zero emissions by 2050, ensuring a clear synergy between the NDC and the IRP. The interdependence between the nationally determined contributions and the integrated resource plan underscores the necessity for a cohesive and coordinated implementation strategy. And finally, enhancing gender mainstreaming and stakeholder consultation. The NDCs must develop context-specific gender climate mainstreaming strategies that cater to the needs of women in both urban and rural areas and intentional and meaningful contributions. On the big one, climate finance and the NCQG, this COP is being labeled the finance COP for many reasons, but mainly because of the new collective quantified goal. This is to be decided at COP29. In 2009, the developing world committed to raising $100 billion USD per year by 2020 to 2025 to be directed to low and middle income countries. That target was not met for a long time. And funding for Global South climate action has fallen short in quality and quantity. The mandate for the NCQG comes from Article 9.3 of the Paris Agreement, and it states that the $100 billion agreement will go until 2025. And then after 2025, we would need a new goal, now using the 100 billion as a floor. This means we would need quality finance. It should be emphasized that the quality of the finance is equally important. Negotiations around the NCQG should ensure that it meets the needs of those in the Global South, both socially and ecologically. Grant-based, I know we've called for this one multiple times and we're struggling, but we will still call for it. Based on historical emissions and differentiated responsibilities should be prioritized. These negotiations around the formats of financing should take into account the role and mandate of public finance institutions. There should be an equitable relationship. Deals should not enable the top-down relationships between the donor and the recipient, and should ensure that recipient countries maintain their sovereignty. And finally, there should be effective monitoring and evaluation. Along with negotiating for the quantity and quality of the NCQG, it is also important to negotiate for transparent and accessible monitoring and evaluation processes. This will enable us to better understand the impact of the deals as well as address any failures. On adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage, South Africa should advocate for clear, measurable, achievable global goal on adaptation with sector-specific targets. The push for a global goal needs to be accompanied by a call for equitable adaptation finance for developing countries. We encourage the parties to develop action plans on how to better manage emergency response funding and relief aid for efficient and equitable distribution. The Loss and Damage Fund, operationalized at COP28, should be guided by party-responsive needs to complement existing structures while avoiding additional burdens on developing countries in terms of reporting and other obligations. And finally, guided by the best available science and as appropriate traditional and indigenous knowledge, and follow a gender mainstreaming approach. On a topic close to my heart as well, being a negotiator under this topic, for ACE, youth and gender, ACE Youth and Gender negotiations should see prioritized financial and technical support for implementation, including institutionalizing climate education, renewing the Lima Gender Action Plan this year and ensuring gender as a cross-cutting theme, youth and women-led capacity building, and specifically facilitating peer-to-peer learning discussions between youth from developed and developing countries, inclusion in decision-making and governance, embedding youth and women participation in national and international climate governance. We're calling for accessible climate information and advocacy tools, funding and support for youth-led initiatives, and promoting intergenerational collaboration. Going into Baku, we recognize and applaud the DFFE for its continued support of young people, and we are internally grateful to sit beside them at the international climate negotiations. As we look towards growing our capacity and setting an example, young people are ready to lead. We are eager for the actions taken from the Climate Change Act of 2024 to be further mainstreamed in South Africa's international climate change policy and how it situates itself as a regional influence. And we recognize South Africa's role in the international community, especially with its stance on the Pact of the Future and the Declaration for Future Generations this past September, adopted in New York. After Baku, South Africa and South African youth will be ready to take the COP29 decision into its stride and foreign policy initiatives into its stride ahead of G20 and Y20, which we'll be planning to host. Post-COP, young South Africans are eager to integrate the decisions into their grassroots activities and youth-led organizations and seek further partnerships with government and relevant stakeholders to mainstream these activities. And finally, young people welcome and call for consultation processes towards the review and renewal of our NDCs 3.0 and the operationalization of the Climate Change Act. It is crucial to ensure that the nationally determined contributions explicitly reference and align with the objectives of the Climate Change Act for 2024. In conclusion, I'd like to acknowledge the contributors to the statement and to say that South African youth are leading. We've been participating since COP28 in various activities, including ELCOE, ARCOE, the Model Parliament, and the Summit of the Future, and we're willing to take this further with the department on all of the partners listed here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zahir. Okay, is that you? Please step forward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yakanim Chiako. I'm your COP29 DFFE and SIA appointed youth delegate. But most importantly, I'm here representing the SIA youth constituency that worked very hard to produce this. Look at how pretty it is. This SIA document. So most importantly, this document outlines our ambitions for a justice-centered lens towards climate finance, as seen in some of the contributions towards the newly collective goals that aim to transform the financial landscape to one that centers grants as opposed to debt-driven solutions. We champion equitable agri-food systems that center local food systems, as well as the deliberate inclusion of youth, amongst others. We are hopeful that this finance COP will not only recognize the financial need of our globalized climate emergency, but also recognize the intersectional needs of such. We truly hope to see our ambitions for COP undertaken in negotiation rooms that we might not have the physical access to or the technical expertise to liaise in. Furthermore, we'd like to thank the GIZ for their continued support throughout the process, and we look forward to the Minister having a fun time reading it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the voices of the youth. I would just like to see if we can get back to Thando. I don't want us to skip him because obviously civil society is a very important voice in South Africa. So we'll try to cross over to Thando just with audio to see if that's better and we can hear him without any technical glitches. Technical team?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Thando.
All right, awesome. Let's try this again. Apologies, network is just terrible. Bandwidth on our side. So I'll be quick because I think most of the points have been covered by the previous speakers. The main insertion I'd like to make is just one that relates to justice predominantly, and I'll speak to what it might look like for 5 topics or key issues. So relative to the NCTG, as I said earlier, we do support the position of the South African government on what they're trying to do there. I think from a justice lens, or climate justice lens specifically, the quantum is of critical importance. Of course, part of our role is only to agitate for the best possible figure that we could get, both as a global community, but also domestic and specifically global South. We're all quite familiar with the impacts being felt more so in the global South than global North countries. And so the quantum of finance needs to also support financial flows, particularly to developing countries, including our own, to ensure that we can build the necessary resilience towards climate impacts. The second topic will just be on Article 6. Again, broadly speaking, I want to say we support South Africa's position. However, the around the topic of Article 6, for us, what would be a key consideration is how in the implementation of Article 6, because I think at this point it's beyond the debate of whether it will take or not. So in the implementation thereof is to what extent it is that we can safeguard, particularly those who are dependent on natural environments for their livelihoods, right? How do we ensure that in the implementation of both market and non-market approaches, that those who are dependent are not adversely impacted? Otherwise, we'd be making a regression in terms of our development. On adaptation finance, I think we've seen a lot of the impacts that have happened, particularly in the KZN region, increasingly in the Gauteng and northern parts of the country. And so if specifically on GGA and the indicators, one of the key things is those indicators, as already stated. What's the justice lens there is to ensure that the key thing with we all know it's different, right, depending on the geography that you're in. But in a case like a province like KZN and other parts as well of the province, where access to some of that financing would be critical for it to be able to bounce back as a province, I think is absolutely key. And then, of course, to ensure that there's a clear pathway as well for those who are affected to know where in which they might find that financing. On the Just Transition Work Program, the only thing we'd like to support, or not support, but emphasize is the additionality component. It's I guess there's already been quite a bit of body of work that's been happening around the just transition within South Africa. I fully support the position that we are a global leader in this space and we ought to maintain that position. However, not to do so without necessary support for our just transition plans, but also not negatively impacting those who will be displaced by the just transition, I think is absolutely critical. The loss and damage fund, even though it was quite groundbreaking having it settled within a day, is awesome in and of itself. However, it also has taken a little bit of shine, for instance, from the adaptation finance, but also has been a little bit quiet in terms of new funding committed to it. And so one of the things we'd like to push for there is particularly support from developed countries to continue to make transfers into the loss and damage fund, both for disaster relief, in a word, but also for the Warsaw mechanism. I think these would be critical because, again, they speak to South Africa's immediate needs for being able to bounce back from the severity of the environmental impacts and disasters that we're seeing increasing at scale. And then lastly, just to say that in the forthcoming attractions, i.e. the NDCs and other work related to both the UNFCCC process, civil society does remain committed to support those processes and will continue to engage with all the relevant stakeholders and hopefully all of you. I think at the moment now, especially as we've seen, the last 3 COPs have been vaguely so termed finance COPs. We're getting to a kind of convergence now where finance is becoming the key. And unfortunately, there's a invisible line being drawn in the sand. And in so doing, we need to be able to work together, both at civil society, government, business, and youth to be able to get ourselves over that line. Program Director, thanks. That's all from us.
Thank you, Tando. All right, excellent. That is all from our speakers. Before we move on to the next item, which is the question and answer session, I'd just like to remind those who are joining us online to please remember to tell us which organization they're from and who they are, where they're from, before they ask their questions so that we can address them correctly. I would now like to call up to the stage, or to the front rather, Mr. Blessing Manale, who will be facilitating the question and discussion session of our program. Thank you.
Good morning once again, colleagues, Minister, Executive Director, Councillor Pukunzi, delegates. I've met most of you, so I'm sure it'll be easier for me to facilitate the session. And I don't know who wants to be the first taker. Questions, additional comments, you can respond to the youth statements, to what the Minister has said, to whatever your organization has said you must come here to say. I'll take Richard, then I can see, I think it's Dr. Motibang there, and then another hand at the back. So you can see I already would know half of my stakeholders, Minister, because we work with them quite well with the department. Richard, do you? I might be calling your name, just introduce yourself again so that you can confirm that I really know you. Or that the name I'm actually calling is really yours. Thanks. Proceed, Richard.
Thank you, Blessing. Yeah, my name is Richard Worthington. I work with civil society, including being an associate to the South African Faith Communities Environmental Institute. And my question is particularly pertinent to South Africa, to the Minister leading the negotiations on mitigation, and is to do with methane. And what sort of position or approach South Africa has for addressing the misinformation currently being peddled that natural gas is clean or green. And I ask this not in the context of short-term deliberation of the role of natural gas in South Africa's transition to renewable energy. That's a relatively small question, but globally, with methane being 80 times more powerful than CO2 as a climate-forcing greenhouse gas over a 20-year period, we have been effectively denying the impact of fugitive methane throughout supply chains. America is now the largest global exporter of natural gas, I believe, but certainly massive in there. And we're seeing more and more of this happening globally. So there is a methane goal. I don't think South Africa signed on to it yet, I'm not sure. But this is clearly something that needs to be addressed with absolute urgency, particularly given the findings from the new Earth observation systems that can now observe methane from satellites. So the latest knowledge and information tells us that there's been massive underreporting of methane emissions, and this could really seriously undermine work that is done to date. So if business has anything interesting to offer on the subject, I'd be keen to hear from them too, but it's really a question for government. Thank you.
Thank you. Business, I think you can also take a shot at that. Tando, you're with business now, ne? No more with society. Happy, I mean happy, yes. Happy would come in there after Minister and the lead departmental negotiators, I think. Dr. Motibang?
Thank you. I am Sitat Motebang from UNISA, Department of Development Studies, but also representing SAWID, South African Women in Dialogue. Mine is, I don't know if it's a question or statement, but to just say, can the department consider including women-led organizations as a key stakeholder? It's nice to see that youth is included, and we've made we've reached out in the past to say that there must be a representation of women-led organizations. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Sitati. The department, the PCC, please engender your negotiations. I think that's the right academic term to use, not Doctor? Please engender your both your content and your delegation. I'll take the hand at the back there. I might not see who that is.
Gillian Hamilton, good morning, everybody. I work with civil society in South Africa, and I specifically work with the Green Connection. I have a few questions. The first one, Minister, we would love to know the details on the mandate for your facilitation role in the mitigation work group, if we could have some specific idea of what you've been asked to do. On the NCQG, we would like to know exactly what the quantum is that South Africa is supporting. Nobody has mentioned that so far. The unilateral trade measures, we'd like to get an idea of what's happening with the unilateral trade measures. Then, when will South Africa deliver its new NDC? We know the official date is in February next year, but we'd like to know when South Africa is going to deliver an ambitious NDC. And then, just to say, commenting on a few things, the first thing, Minister, please don't back down on the NCQG. Civil society internationally is supporting the developing countries, and we really are standing behind you, and we know that the developed countries need to hear this. Then we really miss the national stakeholder consultations that we used to have with DFFE. This is more of an information sharing session. I would not call this a consultation session. And we would appreciate getting more interaction with DFFE in the future. And lastly, civil society would appreciate a response to the letter we sent to the South African government on the G20 priorities. And I know it's separate to this work, but it is a very important aspect in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian. That was quite a mouthful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'd like to thank the Minister for the initiative they're taking, but I see a dire-lack of private initiative here. And we shouldn't only look for our salvation in climate change from the developed countries. I represent Zero Carbon Charge. We're developing a completely green charging network that will act as a catalyst for the migration to electric vehicles. I think we need to look at the opportunities and stop shooting ourselves in the foot. We started doing this, engaging with government and all government departments. Just to get a comment from Sunral takes in the order of 500 days, and they're still not forthcoming. 1 hectare permitting of a renewable site in the Western Cape takes up to 900 days. So I think we need, as a country, collectively to look at how we can get all our local ducks aligned to migrate off fossil fuels in South Africa for our transport sector is going to take 83,000 hectares under solar panels. The advantage is we can privately fund that. We can privately develop that without putting stress on the government finances and without staring the eyes of the rest of the world. So I think we should also look at the low-hanging fruit and do what we can do. But it's impossible by having gatekeepers in all state and government departments and semi-government organs like SANRAL that simply pushes back and pushes back and pushes back. And that's in spite of the National Climate Commission, the commitment from the President, and the unblocking units in various provinces. It's still virtually undoable if you try and navigate all those regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got quite a sizable amount of questions. Maybe I should allow responses per Mediona. Let me suggest that it would be Pemi, but maybe just on behalf of the PCC, Dr. Mutebang, we've actually decided to establish a gender reference group just specifically for the NDC process we are undertaking in support of the DFFE, because we've actually noted that the mainstreaming of gender issues and women issues, not only in the just transition framework, in a number of our climate action responses is not quite sufficient. So I think that our team leading the NDC, Steve, is in this meeting. Dr. Mutebang, I'll make sure that you connect with them, but I think that they would appreciate the feedback of the academic institutions also in the NDC, particularly on the gender work research they've done in this area. So really appreciate that feedback. Pemi, do you want to take the first round of questions? Then maybe Minister can sweep, or Minister will do that. Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start, and then Penny will pick up a couple of the issues. Yes, thank you very much for your questions. I mean, they're very insightful. And of course, as we know, we are in the process of a transition. So what transition actually means is that there is a process, and that process is ongoing, and it's going to take a long time. It's taken a long time for the world to get into this position, but of course, there is a very pressing need and an existential crisis upon us, so we need to move with speed. And I think everybody has agreed that, and I think that is a very good point from which to start. Most of the nations in the world, including South Africa, are absolutely committed to moving towards a just energy transition. There are notable exceptions that need to come to the party, and that's why discussions at COP, etc., become quite complicated. I'm sure everybody is aware that I'm a relatively newly appointed minister, and I have had the opportunity, however, to engage in numerous fora. I've been to China for the 8th Ministerial on climate change. I have been to Abidjan to meet the other African environment ministers to also discuss the same issue. I've been to the United Nations with the President to have discussions on climate. I've been to Rio also, where I now chair the Climate and Sustainability Work Group, or the committee for G20, because South Africa is going to be the president of that next year. So there's a lot happening. And certainly the South African government and the GNU is very much animated in getting progress. And we do occupy a very important place in the world, as we all know. So on the question of the methane, yes, indeed, it is problematic. We do need to be focused absolutely on making sure that our energy gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. There is discussion in South Africa now at the moment, I'm sure you are aware, on the issue of fracking. That is going to be coming up very soon, because there is also some movement in that particular direction, and that requires a lot of consultation, etc. I think there is very much an understanding that methane is in fact harmful, and that it is something that permeates the supply chains, and that transition is necessary. But I do think that if there is somebody from business who would like to address that in a little bit more detail, they can, and also Pemi would maybe talk a bit to that as well. In terms of women-led organizations in consultations, yes, absolutely. I think fundamentally is that the government is absolutely committed to make sure that we hear as much as possible from our people. Because what the crucial thing is that we do want to make sure we have a just transition, and that we really do mean that nobody is left behind. Now, I was recently at a meeting in Washington of the World Bank to have a discussion with the finance ministers, the environment ministers, and the Reserve Bank governors. We have a joint committee called Task Force Klima, which basically was started by Brazil. South Africa will continue that. But that is a discussion with all the people in finance, because it's all about the money. And that's a massive thing that I'll talk to now. But on the women-led organizations, we are very mindful, and I think you'll be pleased to know that amongst our chief negotiators are a number of very bright, smart women also. In terms of the details of the mandate on mitigation, yes, it is complicated because at the last COP there was not consensus reached. I have had a number of discussions already with my Norwegian counterpart. We shall co-chair that stream. We had several meetings at pre-COP in Baku, where I was. It was very clear that we are quite far apart. So what will happen is we will be having discussions individually with each delegation, because obviously what the idea is that if we're going to actually be successful at mitigation, then we obviously have to make a number of changes. So we do have the goal in mind. We want to make sure that our planet does not heat up more than 1.5 degrees. That is going to be very difficult to do. But what my objective is, and certainly my counterpart in Norway, is that we can bring the parties closer together. We did have about 4 meetings, I think, with a number of delegates from several countries, and I mean, to put it mildly, there was a bit of scratching that went on because there is quite a difference of opinion. But I think the reason why South Africa in particular was requested to co-chair is because we actually are friendly with everybody, and we are able to have conversations with everyone in the world, which is quite a unique position to be in, and we're very mindful of that, the fact that we are able to do that. So I certainly believe we'll be able to get closer. I'm not sure we'd be able to get absolute consensus, but we certainly are going to try. In fact, I'm going to plan to stay 1 or 2 days after a plan, because it always runs a bit over. So we'll have to see how that goes. But certainly South Africa is occupying a very significant place in that negotiation. On the quantum of the NCQG, it's very complicated in terms of the finance, because as was mentioned, the developed economy countries were meant to contribute $100 billion per annum. They did not do that. And the first thing I asked is the new minister, obviously, because I'm new, so let me ask these questions. I said, well, where's the spreadsheet? I mean, it's not hard. It's not hard. You just put you open a spreadsheet, you put the number in, you add it up, you press the little sum total thing, and there's the number. But apparently it's much more complicated than that, because the developed countries said, well, we paid for this, and we paid for that, and we paid for this, and therefore we did contribute the 100. But there is no spreadsheet, so that is quite interesting. But anyway, I have raised the issue, and I've said, well, even if it was 100 billion that was given, it's certainly not enough. Our view is that at least $1.3 trillion is required. Now, of course, getting the developed economy countries to actually contribute what they're supposed to is hard, because what's happened is that there has been a move towards the right. And so it's more difficult for countries to contribute. So I've said to a number of countries, who shall remain nameless at this moment, and I've said to them, look, we want a little bit of honesty here. You must say, if you're going to contribute, then do it, put it in the bank, and then you can add it on the spreadsheet. It's not hard. If you're not going to, then say no, and then we know it's not coming, and then we can make the other plan. Because South Africa's good at making a plan. We keep moving forward, and that's what we do. So that's a message that we've had. Also, very importantly for South Africa, is that we have put onto the agenda, and we did that first at the UN in the discussions on climate, is that we need a new financial model. The one currently is not working, and we are working on a South African model that we can present at some point, but that's a process that needs to it needs to move along. So that is progressing. On CBAM, or that's basically the unilateral measures, I think that the question was about. Now, CBAM is problematic. We have said right from the outset that we are displeased with that, obviously. Now, in diplomatic terms, as you know, I'm a politician, not a diplomat, but displeased is a heavy word, and we have said it because we are displeased about it. It is unilateral. We don't want additional taxes, especially not externally imposed taxes, because it hurts our economy, and we already have poverty, unemployment, and we need to move on. We need growth in our economy. So what we have been doing is speaking to the European Union intensely to say, we believe that it is possible to mitigate that. So if it is going to be the CBAM, of course we're unhappy about it, but it's possible to neutralize it. And we are having a conversation about how to neutralize the CBAM so it does not impact on our economy in a negative way. It is in fact possible, and that discussion is on, and we're pressing it hard, and I'm working with the Minister of Finance on that, and also the Minister of Trade and Industry. On the G20 priorities, yes, we are going to be the president next year. One of the key priorities that we have been raising for a long time, and we've already been discussing that, is the financial architecture. The global financial architecture is not working, especially for the developing economy countries such as South Africa. And of course, we must be very animated about what we need as a country. So that is a priority, and we believe that that G20 priority links very closely to the climate financing conversation. So the climate financing, which everybody wants to have the conversation on, leads then to this other conversation that's been too long outstanding. And as we know, South Africa has a very heavy debt burden. We're paying 1 billion rand per day on interest repayments. It is crowding out service delivery, etc. So we do need to consider that. It's not only South Africa that's heavily indebted this way. There are many African countries who have this similar situation. So what we do believe is that there is space. We want economic growth, obviously. That's why we must transition sensibly. But at the same time, we also think that there's space in the financial model to have a look at the heaviness of the debt, because there needs to be some kind of easing in our view. But that's a conversation that is ongoing. Then on the private initiatives, yes, of course, I think we all know this already, that government is inefficient in some aspects, maybe many. But I think the place to start is to acknowledge that that is so. And once you recognize that the problem is there, then you can take the necessary action. So it is so that government is not as efficient as it should be, and that it can speed up. But of course, processes matter enormously, and also consultation matters enormously. And so sometimes that slows down things, but it's not a bad thing. You need to consult as much as possible, because we all need to move together. In terms of regulations, well, certainly in my department, what we are doing is we are looking at how we could make regulation more streamlined without taking away any safeguards at all, because we need to speed things up sometimes, but not always. And so that's always the difficult thing. What I found in government as a new minister is that if I say yes, I get sued. If I say no, I get sued. So, it's one of those environments that we have. So what we try to do is to find the best solution for everybody within the constraints that we have, because everybody has a particular position, but we try to coalesce. But what's been very exciting today is that we are very much on the same page. So it's going to be great for me to be able to go to COP and say, well, this is the South African position. I'm very pleased to be leading the delegation then, because we can push really hard as a voice of a developing nation. But anyway, Pemi, would you like to maybe add something?
Thank you, Minister. Pemi.
Thank you very much. I will add on the NDC. We are planning to have this, they are June next year, and we'll be starting with we've already started with the research on that. We're not going to change it much from what we previously had. We're going to be doing consultations starting in April. And everyone will be involved in those consultations. In terms of the methane, as Minister already said, we're also reporting this on our GHG inventory as well. And this is an effort to reduce those, including investing in cleaner technologies through but however, this is safe to say that the mandate lies with the Department of Energy and Electricity. But it's important that we don't only just pick on one of the GHG, like methane, but all of them. So these are some things that we all report them in our GHG inventory. On the gender, we do include gender constituencies to the consultations, as well as to the negotiations. The constituency that we had invited was from the Gender CC to come and give a presentation in terms of what would be the expectation for gender constituency going into COP, and they were not able to make it. But having said that, we also work extensively on gender issues, and we're trying to do that on gender mainstreaming. Last week, we also had a session where we had climate change, adaptation, gender mainstreaming dialogue. We also have a gender action plan, and we're in the process of finalizing it. And so I think we are doing our part as well. We might not be able to reach everyone, but we're doing as much as we can. And on the more interaction, I think that one, was on, Minister, that one was directed to you, where we need to have more stakeholder engagements. But I think this is, as Minister says, he's new, but I want to say that as the department, we're doing our best to try and consult as much as possible. And I think there is always room for improvement.
Thanks, Pemi. I think I can say the same about the pieces that we're actually daily raising the bar. It's never good enough, but we really want to improve, and we appreciate the feedback, and we know that it's honest and it's more about craving for more interaction. And Minister, you're not the only one who's been looking for the Excel spreadsheet. Everybody has been looking. We've seen the Word document, but we are yet to see the formulas, as you say. I think we've got a few questions online as well. Norma, do we have any of the online participants with questions, or are they written down?
Yes, Blessing, we have a number of questions, but I don't know if we could first take the two hands that have been put up. If you could just let in the two hands that are up. There are two people. One is Kulegani Magwaza, and the second is Brandon Abdeno.
We'll take Brandon and Mr. Magwaza in that order. The online team, do you want to beam them through? And when I say mute them, you can mute them also. Proceed, Iggy. Yeah.
Hi, this is
who's coming? Come through online.
Kulegani. Am I
Oh,
audible?
Kulegani.
Yes. Oh, thanks. Yeah. One of my colleagues there asked about a position of South Africa in terms of supporting a quantum in terms of the NCQG. So that was the question I typed. So because I don't think it was answered. So I think we really need to know if the minister or anyone is in a position of answering that question. What will define a successful quantum in terms of a successful NCQG in terms of the quantum? Yeah, that's my question. Sorry if I'm mixing it up, but yeah.
Thanks. I think it needs a figure, and yeah, proceed.
I did actually mention $1.3 trillion that we thought was a useful place to start. Thanks.
Yes, $1.3 trillion. With the current exchange rate of 1:18, you can do the math. It's quite a lot of, it's many zeros. But that's the number that can at least make us enter the relay field. I think that's what we're saying. Yeah. The second question, Norma?
From Brandon.
Or proceed.
Thanks, Blessing. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Thanks. Good morning, Minister and colleagues. A few quick points. On the position that the JT work program should be non-prescriptive, I think while we need to be careful of inappropriate prescription, I think to have some fundamental guiding values there to ensure that what gets called JT is not in fact just propping up business as usual. Similarly, on the point made by Busa that climate finance should be free from conditionalities, I think we do need to see conditionalities again that ensure that proper, decisive and science-led climate action is being taken. Then a question on the elephant in the room that cannot be named in certain circles, the fossil fuel phase out. What is the government's position on pushing for that wording? We see from the UNEP emissions gap report that we're not making the progress that we need to make. And then finally, not part of the substance, but we'd like to see the government speak out on protection of human rights and climate defenders. We're seeing legitimate dissent being squashed around the world ever increasingly. We're seeing people's lives being risked, and we're seeing people being killed. So we would like to see the government support a landscape where this protection is in place. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Minister. You can take those.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, let me just start with the climate financing. Yes, of course, grant money and very, what would you call them, highly concessional money is the best kind of money to get, but it is the hardest money to get. And we have had some discussions with some of the nations that have been quite generous to us, and they have raised the speed at which we are moving. And so if you are not moving fast enough and there is money available to move, it becomes very difficult to get some more. I mean, that does make some logical sense. So as Pemi did mention, is that the speed of the transition is in the hands of the Department of Energy and Electricity, because that's where the projects lie. But I think that we all agreed that the speed is not fast enough and that we need to move faster, especially on building the transmission lines, because you can build greener energies, but if you can't get them into the grid, then you're going to really get nowhere. So I think that we are all on the same page in terms of that understanding. Getting the action and implementation is always the harder part. But I do think that the view is that we must move with speed. On the fossil fuel phase out, I mean, we all know that already is complicated, because South Africa sits on a mountain of coal, and that we are committed to working towards not actually using that amount of coal in the ground. So there is a cost, actually, because one has to remember, if you want to look historically, is that, how did we get here? Is that there were other nations that were burning coal for hundreds of years, and now here we are, and so we are then the emitters. So we have to bear that context in mind. But however, having said that, we do have an existential crisis upon us, and we do need to move in the right direction, and we have agreed on that. So I think you can be quite sure and clear that government is 100% committed to moving in the direction we need to move in. But we also have to bear in mind that the speed, I don't know if you would be aware of Komati, and that is an example of what you do not want to do. I mean, obviously that was before my time, but the more you look at it, the more you see what an absolute disaster you can have on your hands if you make a big mistake. Because if you leave people behind, you actually have very serious consequences. And this is what I've said to some of the developed nations as well, is that of course we're moving at speed and as fast as we can, but who is going to feed the hungry babies if it goes wrong? That's the question. And you can't have that. So the fact of the matter is that nobody must be left behind in poverty as we speed along, and it is possible, absolutely possible. And we do have commitments to make sure that we don't have that to happen, because nobody wants that. Nobody in this room, nobody out there, nobody in the world wants that to happen. So we must be mindful of that. But the commitment is definitely to move in that direction. And I think that would be very useful. I think the question was asked about more consultation. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I think that what we should try to do is we should have a joint communication at some point with also the Minister of Energy and Electricity, because I think that would be very nice to have, because we do as government sometimes work as a silo, and that's not how you get things done. So I think that would be quite a useful thing, but we do communicate very often, and we're absolutely on the same page on that. And then, of course, protection of human rights. Well, South Africa has most likely the best constitution in the world. We have a constitution, we have a human rights, a Bill of Human Rights, and we are very much animated by that. That is why we are, in fact, friendly with many nations across the world, with everybody, because what we're trying to do is make sure that human rights are protected everywhere. So we are very mindful of the fact that as it gets noisy and messy, fault lines arise, and people take positions that might well be difficult for some. So people who would want to move a bit faster, for example, there should not be that kind of abrasion happening. But I think in any transition, and this one in particular, a very big one, is emotions run very high. And there are lots of vested interests for things to remain the same. And that is why we have abrasions that we have. But certainly if you look at our own country, is that we don't have that kind of situation, is that we all are committed to go in the right direction. When you have discussions with other countries, you might find that they're not as committed. But that is something that we cannot control. Because the fact of the matter is that there are sovereign nations, and we are a sovereign nation, and we make it very clear that South Africa, as much as we move as fast as we cannot be dictated to, and we cannot be pushed around. Unfortunately, that doesn't work that way, because we must be able to ensure that nobody gets left behind. And that is the crucial thing. It's not the simplest thing in the world to do. And if anybody thinks that it is simple, then they are simply wrong. But I think that we can be very proud of the progress that we have made. And the eyes of the world are upon us. There's no doubt about that. I don't know, Penny, if you want to do maybe.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think Minister's covered all of them. And I think that we just wanted to emphasize, in terms of the South African situation, we have in almost every occasion condemned the vilification or attack on environmental activists. Minister, it's happening in isolated cases, and sometimes because the NGOs are not only in environment, they are in housing, they are in transportation. So the kind of attacks come from all kinds of interests, as you've said, contracts, the coal mafia, the construction mafia, and community leaders are generally seen to be running across all kind of community interests. So sometimes it's not even environmental issues. But I think that the South Africans have always said that freedom of association, freedom of speech, the right to express yourself, the right to protest. So I think that in South Africa we've said that to corporates and to government and to anybody, do not silence dissent, engage with it. And I think that we must continue to say that without fear or favor. The last round, the second round of questions, or online we've got more.
Yes.
Yes.
So here are the written questions from the Q&A.
Okay.
David Hallows says, on Article 6, we are concerned that the weaknesses of CDM have not been addressed. Carbon market mechanisms and methodologies have enabled fraud on a large scale. How will SA ensure that Article 6 will not enable cheating on a large scale? And secondly, ensure no double counting. We are also concerned that market mechanisms tend to reproduce NS inequities. The second question from the Q&A from Lufuno Chikalange, based on financing, they would like to find out what are our financing goals and how much money have we received since COP28? What are the mitigation factors in place for the NDC 2025 to ensure that the financing gaps are closed? I just want to understand what were our goals and what was achieved moving to COP29, and if not, what are those challenges? And then the third question from the Q&A from Sinomncedi Makita from the Eastern Cape Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism. They ask, how will SA negotiate to address the disproportionate effects of climate change, especially the fact that the least responsible but most affected countries are those in the global south? This is in relation to the link between trade and climate change, which requires the need for a global carbon framework. The EU has taken a stand as part of their own emission trading scheme by introducing and defending the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Despite threats of litigation stemming from African countries who may potentially be adversely affected by this mechanism, the EU bloc has proceeded with this, and we are already feeling the effects with Mercedes-Benz shredding hundreds of jobs, with other effects being felt in other areas as well. How will we negotiate in this regard? I'll just stop there, but we have a lot. The Q&A is buzzing.
Okay, we might not have enough buzzing time ourselves, but I think that we should be able to respond to even some of those questions through the AI notes and respond back to people, and we always do that. So if they receive emails after this from the minister or from the officials, I think that we can commit that we'd actually respond in writing to some of those chats on the group. But we still have got a few weeks to Baku, and the people could still send comments. Yes.
I think that's a really good idea, because there were some technical questions, but I do want to address one question in particular, and that was the question about the imbalance. And it was raised early on by several participants about the, not fault line, but maybe the line between the developed economies and the developing economies. There's very much clearly a fault line that sits there. And it will need to be addressed, and that's where the straightforward conversations happen. And on that very last question was that, how do you get that balance? The question that I have certainly been asking is, we obviously all, certainly in South Africa and many other nations, are committed to the just just energy transition, but justice for whom? And you've also got to bear in mind that there are those nations, specifically in Africa, where there's been terrible desertification, etc., where there is very little happening. It's drier and drier and drier, and it's driving conflict, etc. We need to green those places. But how do you get resources over there? That's the important thing. So when we talk about just, it needs to be just for everybody. And that is something that needs to be also quite importantly placed onto the table, and we're quite animated about that. But we are driving that also. Thank you.
Thanks. Pemi, do you want to take the question on Article 6? Before you come in, I think there is also a need for a discussion on trade and climate. I think it's coming, it's a theme that quite a lot of people want to engage with. And I think even if not today, we'd need to deepen that discussion in South Africa. I mean, I was even asking, does it mean that I cannot sell certain things because they were cooked in electricity? I might try to sell Magwinya to an EU delegation, then I told you, you cooked them with coal, because that's what it practically means. Anything else that has been a product downstream of that fossil fuel then gets taxed. That's my elementary understanding. It might not necessarily be fed cook, but it means a lot of our products will suffer that fate. Broadly. And I think that we can talk to the DFFE, the DTIC, and have a series of engagement about trade and climate. I think it would be a very good discussion to engage with. We've started, but I don't think it has went into the hearts and minds of many that are worried about it. Pemi, proceed.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that would be good to have that discussion on trade and environment. And just to say on a lighter note, that's what the discussions in the response measures are working on, where you take your trade your response or your environment responses that would have trade implications, and that's what we're trying to work on. So we do have our trade colleagues attending these meetings as well to ensure that we're not out of turn when we're in the negotiations. On Article 6, we emphasize on environmental integrity, and that's something that we're still going to be emphasizing on, the sustainable development and the importance of tracking on the use of Article 6. The mechanism to enable transparency through strong accounting measures, methodological guidance is to be presented, and we seek to increase ambition in the implementation of NDC. I mean, we can go on, this is more technical, and we'd want the whole session to go on how we would look at Article 6, but this is something we can respond to further at a later stage. Thanks.
Thanks. The colleague from the Eastern Capes, Nomngeti, on the historical polluters and all that. I think it's an open dialogue, but maybe you could give feedback. But I think that it's been in South African messages that say that there are historical polluters that have benefited, and now we've got to match that. I think that there is a clear South African message around equal but differentiated responsibility, common but differentiated responsibilities. But I mean, if you've got anything more to add, Minister or the team, you could do that. But I think we've got a clear message as South Africa on historical polluters and the pace of our transition. Good. Do you want to take the last round? I'm very, very generous. The last round of questions, then I'm going to allow the deputy chairperson designate of the Presidential Climate Commission, or the executive director. I'm using the word deputy chairperson designate to secure my job. For the last round of questions, then there are two hands there. Oh, I said last round and everybody. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we'll take that batch. Then we'll respond. Then Dr. Alva will basically give us what it's a summation of the current messages coming out of here. Then we'll take over the presentation from the NBI on how South Africa will be showcased at Baku and how we can interact with that pavilion even when you're offside, and then would break. But let me take that round of questions. When they respond, I'm giving back to my co-chair. I've been very jittery here. Thanks. Colleagues, I'll start on my left.
Thank you. Given the recent scientific findings that found that Earth's carbon sinks had severely decreased in capacity, how will the South African delegation factor this into the conversation on the carbon markets?
I'm sorry, can you just introduce yourself for the record?
Sorry, Kanim Jiako.
Oh, okay. Oh, thanks. You handed over the statement to the minister now. Yes, can recognize that voice. Another person?
I'm Modaro Kunwana. I represent many organizations. I represent PACJA, Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. I also represent the Alliance for Just Deliberation on Solar Geoengineering. So I want to ask about the use of solar geoengineering. We talk much about adaptation, mitigations, and climate finance. So I want to know about the Department of Environmental and Forestry. The Minister want to know about the research on the use of solar geoengineering in South Africa. Because normally most research is being done in Global North, but here in Global South, we are not doing anything about it. Actually, in most African countries, we are quiet about the use of solar geoengineering. I know it's a very controversial one, but should we invest more on the use of solar geoengineering to see what is impact, what is its consequences also? So my second question is about the capacity building. What is it that PCC and also the department is doing to the vulnerable rural communities? Because when I was doing my research on rural communities, they don't even know about climate change. Farmers don't even know about climate change, but we talk about it here on the national level. Should we also invest on saying that this rural climate resilience or NGOs or grassroots be given money so that they can go around with their using their local languages so that they can teach people doing capacity building about climate change? My other one is that, is it possible that when you go for COP29, you also ask them about the issue of saying the money for loss and damage is being controlled by the developed countries. There's no stage like a big organization that's controlling that. But is it possible that as Africans, developing countries, can we form maybe a stage, maybe let's say it's an organization or it's our own headquarters to say, we want to control this percentage of money because we're the ones who are developed and who are being affected by climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Mulado. Sir?
Thank you, sir. My name is Andrew de Block. I'm a Member of Parliament with the DA, also a member of the Portfolio Committee on Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. Thank you, Minister, and thank you to all the presenters. It's great to have this discussion today, and it's great to have so many stakeholders in the room. I think it was really important that the Minister used the words existential crisis, and I think there's a lot of us in the room who are very happy that the Minister is giving this important issue the due attention it deserves. This is a crisis facing not only South Africa but the world, and it's going to take a whole of society approach, which is why I say it's great that we have such diverse stakeholders in the room, including civil society, faith-based groups, women leadership groups, the youth. I'm still classified as youth, so I'm very happy to see some of my compatriots, even though I'm edging towards the upper end now. I wanted to ask, Minister, is the GNU taking this as seriously as you do in your specific portfolio? You're going to be providing leadership for South Africa through the Climate Change Act at COP in many different forms, in ways that are going to affect and need to include other intra-governmental portfolios. Agriculture, transport, labor and employment. You talked about energy and electricity. Is this something that you have been consulting on interministerially with your colleagues in Cabinet? And is your department also including cross-departmental discussions into your approaches to COP and into the implementation of the very important Climate Change Act, which I believe will be one of your lasting legacies for over the next 5 years? So we're all behind you and backing you. But taking us into your confidence and just letting us know what have those consultations been, if they have taken place. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. There was a last hand at the back. Oh, yes, in orange. Proceed.
Thank you so much. My name is Mponya Mote. I am with Youth at SAIA, the South African Institute of International Affairs. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. I'm not sure if this is necessarily a question, but more as recognizing some of the gaps that we have and some of the things that we can address going forward. Like, for example, I feel like recycling is not as accessible as it can be, especially in our country. And I feel like we can make that as part of our mandates as going forward as a government, as well as making waste reclaimers part of our conversations, because they actually contribute so much to lessening the waste that is brought to landfills. And half of the time when landfills burn that waste, it in itself becomes a form of environmental degradation. And then also, I think that even if it's not something that we work on and implement entirely, but I believe that there should be more conversations and accessibility towards plant-based food, because these initiatives, whether it's recycling, whether it's talking to waste reclaimers, and whether it's also making sure that people have more access to plant-based food, that is also how we have initiatives on the ground that mitigate environmental degradation and make things much more accessible on the environmental front. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That brings an end to our questions. Norma, you've got online.
Yes, I do, but there's one pressing question. There needs to be clarification on the, let me just read this properly from Carol Payton from News 24. Can you please clarify if the 1.3 trillion mentioned by Minister George is in total for all countries, over what period, and is this an African position?
Okay, thanks. The NCQG question on the 1.3, the quantum people are asking about whether it's just the current South African figure or is it for developing countries. I think Minister will be able to respond to that. Permian Minister, let's respond to that last round of questions, please.
Okay, I'll start on the 1.3 trillion. It is annually, and it is from the developed economies to the developing economies. That is the starting point. In fact, I had a brief conversation with my Australian counterpart at the World Bank meeting. He, in fact, co-chairs the NCQG. And so I said to him, well, how is it going? And he said, oh, it's very difficult. So it's going to be very interesting. But yes, that is what we think is a reasonable expectation. Then on the carbon sinks, yes, indeed. I think that goes to the whole issue of greening. I mean, there is the initiative across the Sahel to plant a lot of trees to try to hold back the deserts, etc. That is going quite well. And I think that what South Africa has, what many other countries don't have, is that we have enormous biodiversity. And we have enormous capacity to plant trees, for example, and to also contribute very much towards adding additional oxygen into the atmosphere through our greening. So I do think that there's a lot of space on that. Pemi can talk a bit about the carbon market. She did mention it briefly. Then on the question of the solar radiation modification, if I heard that correctly, my feedback on that is that it is not supported. I do not actually know what the technology is about, to be honest, but that is what my technical people say. But as I say, I would be very interested to know what it actually means, because it sounds very interesting for sure. On the vulnerable communities who do not know about climate change, I think that's not entirely correct. I do think that communities across South Africa are responding to say the environment that we're working in or living in, it's changing because people see that it is drier. So it doesn't take a scientist to tell that to people. People know that before it was greener or the rain came earlier or something. And that's what people are noticing already. We're seeing in KZN, for example, heavy storms, Eastern Cape, also Western Cape, and our country's getting drier and drier. And our people certainly do notice that, and it's making an impact. I have actually had a discussion with the Minister of Basic Education, because I'm firmly of the belief that we need to have climate change and conservation in our curricula. And that was a very positive conversation, because I think that is something that can be added and should be added, because every single person at school in South Africa in the first instance should know what climate change is about, and also they should know about conservation and how we conserve our very unique and amazing natural heritage. And that is some very exciting prospects that we have. On the loss and damage, yes, indeed, we know they who have the money control the situation. So it is so that the global north does have, in certainly our view, a disproportionate impact. The global financial architecture is not working effectively, certainly not for us as a developing country and the developed, as the global south. And that is a conversation that needs to be pursued with speed, because most of the people of the world reside over there. But if you look at South Africa, for example, we do have the Climate Respond Fund that is taking off, and that is something that we have committed to getting going, and there's been a significant amount of progress, and that will give more control locally, and I think that's very, very important. In terms of the question on the GNU, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's no political differences at all in terms of the fact that we do need to transition. We know the President signed the Climate Change Act into law, and so we are all then committed. Obviously, the most important thing on our minds is economic growth, because we want more jobs in our economy, we want our economy to grow, and we want to make sure that we can lift more people out of poverty over time and also reduce the terrible inequality that we have in our country. So we are all absolutely committed on that. Yes, it is cross-cutting. It affects a number of departments. But of course, the Climate Change Act does reside in Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment and in me as the Minister. And yes, indeed, we are working on sector emission targets, and we are indeed talking to all of the affected departments. And that process, obviously, it's in its infancy, but it is certainly begun. And it's a journey that we have to go on. But again, it is very important that we calibrate effectively, because a system is difficult to change, and if you make a mistake, you have a big consequence. So we are mindful of that, but we are working very much in the right direction. Then on the recycling, I mean, the whole concept of the circular economy came up when I was at AMSON with the environment ministers and other African environment ministers. We were talking about plastic pollution in particular. There's only 4 countries in Africa that produce plastic, but of course plastic washes up on the beaches everywhere, and it causes a lot of problems. There's also dumping of refrigerators in Africa from other countries, which needs to be stopped. The whole concept, though, is to move towards the circular economy. And I chair a committee as well of AMSON, where we're looking specifically at the circularity. What we want to make sure is that products are used for as long as possible, that they are reused, and that there is responsibility for producers. So that cycle needs to be there. So if you're going to be making products that are going to be polluting, then there needs to be consequences for that. And I think that that's something we're moving very nicely in the right direction on. And there will be a lot of conversation on that also at COP about plastic pollution, because it is a big issue. That's all I needed to say, Pam.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you. Maybe just to add on the issue of the geoengineering modification, the correct scientific word would be solar radiation modification. And here it would be best to take this discussion outside, but having said that, as Minister said, it's something that we don't support it as a position from South Africa, but there's also a moratorium on the geoengineering under the UNCBD. So this is something that we might want to discuss outside, offline on this. As I said, it's more technical. And I think on the carbon markets, I had already answered that. So if colleagues or feel that this was not adequately answered, they could also send those written questions so that we can reflect on them thoroughly as well.
Thank you very much. There is a burning question here, not because of the emissions.
Good morning, or good afternoon rather, Minister George and delegation, all protocol observed. I have 3 questions, Chair, but it'll be very quick, and they all relate to one another. I would like to ask whether Minister George and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs would consider and be more involved within the rollout and the legislation process of electric vehicles and also off-grid electric vehicle charging. Why I ask this is, and we did issue a statement supporting the Minister with the release of the draft sectoral carbon emission reduction targets, which is a fantastic initiative to support the Climate Change Act. For example, our project is a completely off-grid development of 120 off-grid charging stations nationwide. And from 2026 to 2030, we could support the department in reducing over 1 million tons of carbon emissions. But we do need more support with red tape reduction, as my executive chairman did mention. And we also would like to ask that the department considers that it is much easier to establish grid-based charging, which is, in our opinion, dirty energy, in comparison to off-grid, which is totally green and renewable energy. The EIA process and environmental application process to establish these is incredibly stringent, particularly in the Western Cape, which I'd like to bring under the attention of the Minister. And essentially, we would like to support the Minister, and we feel that EVs does fall strongly within the Minister's department, and just for that consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. Minister, the interface with the EV policy, I'm sure you'd be interested, but I think they'd like to hear that assurance that the department will play a critical role in guiding the whole of government on the EV rollout.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're all committed to moving in the right direction. Of course, there's obviously a number of potential service providers or service providers, and of course we never get into that kind of detail. But I think the concept generally is that, yes, of course, that is something that we are all animated about. The President did, in fact, in his State of the Nation address, talk again about electric vehicles, and we want to proceed with that. Of course, if you have electric vehicles, you need to have electricity for them. And so that, of course, is something that we must make sure that we are able to do. But yes, we are moving in that direction. Then on the regulations, regulations are always quite complicated because also my department, me as the Minister, I am the appeal authority on the environmental impact, and also I am the appeal authority on mining as well. So it does make for interesting situations. But the fact of the matter is that we do need to make sure that our regulations work properly. So, for example, if there are regulations that we do not require, for example, so you have a number of old regulations that nobody ever looks at, and so therefore why are they there? So that's the question that I've asked, but that does not mean you make it just, just catch as catch can. You've got to make sure you have very stringent environmental regulations, because the potential to do damage to the environment is huge, especially because we are a very dry country already. And so we've got to make sure that our regulations protect effectively our environment. And yes, those kind of regulations make it difficult sometimes to get things done or what people would like to do, but there's a reason for everything. And we cannot just have, just do whatever. No, that's never going to be the case. What we need to make sure is that if we want to protect our environment properly, we need to have the proper regulations in place. They need to be properly policed, and there need to be proper consequences if people break the rules on the environment, because that does happen quite a lot. So we must be quite clear on the need and the purpose, and of course the fact that regulations will always be there to protect, and they're guardrails, and they are there for a reason. And then Femi might want to add something as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Maybe just to say that the electric vehicles are covered under the JET IP, and there's also a need to work on the infrastructure, whether it's grid or off-grid. So that's something that also needs to be looked into, just in addition to what the Minister says.
Thanks. But I was actually going to practically suggest to the colleagues that we should probably exchange numbers, link them up with the JET IP, because they actually launched in a funding and matchmaking platform on Friday, yes, on Friday, and that would be the right place to start with, and they've got quite a very good turnaround team in terms of making sure that they link you up with the Vulindlela office if you've got problems of unlocking some of the authorizations and whatever, land access or local government support. But I think that we could exchange more details and then link you up with the JET IP project management unit in the presidency. They might be able to help you quicker Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much to our participants online. The meeting is not yet over. We are now going to take Dr. Olver to give us a high-level summation. I know that there are people who are raising hands. I'm going to pretend that I'm seeing them but not recognizing them, which is a very thin line. But I'm allowing Dr. Olver to come through, then we can take the NBI presentation. And if there's still time, we could do that, but we are all here. Dr. Olver, thanks.
Thank you, Blessing, and very good morning, everyone. Was it afternoon now? Afternoon already. Time flies, hey? So let me start by thanking the Minister and the President for the confidence that they've placed in me. They are big shoes to fill. I'm following in the footsteps of Mr. Vali Musa, who's been the Deputy Chair for the Commission for the last 3.5 years. And yeah, what I can do is commit to, give it my all, and to continue this process of social dialogue that underpins the work of the Commission, and to giving independent, impartial, science-based advice. Government doesn't always like what we have to say, but we say it nevertheless, and that's what we're meant to do. So we will continue to do that. And I do want to appreciate this morning's engagement. I think it's brilliant, Minister, that you and your team were here listening, engaging with stakeholders. I mean, this is what we always say about the climate transition. It's something that affects the whole of our economy and the whole of society. And in moving forward with the transition, we want to make sure that we take everyone with us. So I think you've exemplified that by your engagement here this morning, so thank you. So I'm not going to try to summarize what everyone said. You made some amazing points, and it struck me that there's an enormous amount of commonality between what government's position is on COP29 and what all of you were saying. And I must say, I was blown away by the youth presentation. I mean, of all of the inputs, the youth took the prize. And it's a sign of the level of organization and the seriousness with which the youth constituency takes the climate transition. So I want to thank you. I know there's a whole team behind you here, but to all of you, thank you for the work that you put into that. And let me make a few remarks about the global environment. I mean, we're in a very difficult period as the world. We have these deep conflicts in Sudan, in Palestine, in Ukraine, potentially between China and the US over Taiwan. So it's a world full of trouble, genocide, human rights abuses. We've also, on the economic front, just come out of COVID-19, so we've got a lot of countries that are really struggling with high debt burdens, particularly in the global south. But it's generally tighter economic conditions. People are, I think, across the board under pressure. Households are under pressure. We've still got this tail end of inflation. And we are also in a period of quite profound and disruptive elections. And you saw the march of the right wing in Europe, anti-immigrant policies, anti-climate policies. We've got this US election which hangs on a knife edge. I mean, as many people are saying, it's basically a coin toss. And if the one side comes in, they could well withdraw us again from the UNFCCC process. And that is a huge and serious blow, because the US represents about 25% of the total historical emissions in the world. So, to have a group like that pull out of the climate negotiations would be enormously disruptive. We also know that global effort is way off track in terms of our climate targets. I don't know if you all saw it, but recently the United Nations Environment Programme released their emissions gap report. They put it out every year before COP. And what they were saying is that on current policy, we are going to go well over 3 degrees of warming. And 3 degrees is in the level of a catastrophic, it's a catastrophic rate of global warming. Even if you take all of the conditional and the unconditional pledges in the NDCs and add them up, they will only bring warming down to 2.6 degrees. So still way above where we need to be. And we know from the global stocktake that we've got to cut emissions by 2030, we've got to cut emissions by 43%. The UNEP report says 42%, so it's broadly the same. And by 2035, we've got to cut it by 60%. So these are massive cuts from where we are in terms of our current NDCs. So next year, everyone is submitting their NDCs, and that's an incredibly important process. And what this COP29 is going to do is to set the context for those NDCs. And very importantly, it's going to agree on this new collective quantified goal for climate finance. So the tone that comes out of COP29 is incredibly important for the NDC process next year, and then the consolidation of that at COP30 in Belém. So, a lot of people have been saying they've got low expectations about Baku. If there's failure at Baku, it's going to have consequential knock-on implications for the whole global level of ambition, and it's going to lock us in. The 1.5 degree target is going to get blown if we fail in Baku. So there's huge pressure and a lot of expectations on all of the world's negotiators, and particularly our team that's leading it. And, South Africa's always punched above its weight in the climate negotiations. I think it's very great news, Minister, that you are facilitating the mitigation engagements at COP29. I think it's a big responsibility. Let me just say a few, you've had some really good inputs this morning on the finance side, and I agree with all of the points raised. And maybe just to underline, it's a very important debate about quantity. The minister talked about this $1.3 trillion that we need per annum to achieve our climate objectives. It's also a debate about the quality of finance. And, as we've discovered in our JETP discussions, the finance we were able to get is very fragmented. It's very much tied to traditional development aid thinking. We weren't able to use it flexibly to leverage up the whole of the capital stack that we need for our transition. So the way that the different bits of finance work together is fundamentally important in order to meet the needs, particularly of developing countries. So quality and quantity issues are going to be vitally important at Baku. The The other point that you've all underlined, and I just want to stress, is the fundamental issue of justice in this transition. And we're a little bit of a world leader in that respect. I mean, South Africa adopted the Just Transition Framework. I think we were the first country to formally adopt such a framework. It's not the first time it's been discussed. It obviously has a long tradition in the labor movement. And building on the work we did in the climate negotiations and many other developing countries, it's now part of a formal work program at COP. What I think we need to guard against, I mean, it's a contested concept, and many countries, particularly in the north, have been trying to limit its definition and water down its content. And I think it's fundamentally important that as South Africa, we continue to assert the core principles that have to underpin a just transition and make sure that the key elements, the focus on livelihoods and decent work, on skilling for the just transition, on economic diversification, on the social support mechanisms we need to ensure that the transition is just. All of these issues are vitally important. And a number of you earlier made the point about also for us to localize green supply chains and green industrialization, we don't just need the finance to be in place, we also need an enabling global trading environment. And the current push towards far more fragmented, insular, protective trade regimes and the imposition of unilateral carbon border adjustment mechanisms, these run counter to developing countries being able to localize supply chains sustainably. Now, in the negotiations, the trade people hate trade issues being picked up in the climate negotiations. So it'll be very difficult to link it formally inside the negotiations. But we need to understand that climate, trade, finance, development, all of these things are interlinked. And we need to broadly, and we'll do it in the climate negotiations, we can also push some of these issues in the G20 next year as we're chairing as South Africa. So we need to see these issues as linked and pursue them through the necessary international fora. So I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, I know I haven't covered all the issues that you've raised. There were very many good points raised. Also on the adaptation side, I mean, I strongly endorse adaptation is the stepchild of the climate negotiations. It's underfunded. It's the countries of the north are more than willing to put money into mitigation because it serves their interests. But when it comes to countries' own adaptation efforts, they're blissfully disinterested. So it's very important that we get the loss and damage fund capitalized, that we get a push around tracking and implementing the new adaptation goal, and generally advance it in the climate negotiations. So thank you everyone for your engagement today. It was really great to have you. And I think we're going to now hand over to hear the NBI input. So thanks.
Thank you very much, everybody. If you wouldn't mind to just bring up the presentation, that'd be great. But in the meantime, I think I'll start. So, Honourable Minister, distinguished guests, thank you so much for having us. It's really exciting to be here to talk about the pavilion. I mean, I think we've heard about some of the more sobering parts, but I mean, the Olympic Stadium in Baku will also be a chance for us to showcase our efforts to have a leadership platform as a country on the international stage. given the dire sort of situation we face in many respects. If we could just jump to the next slide. I mean, this is really the outcome of a partnership that the National Business Initiative, the NBI, has had with government, with the DFFE for over 7 years. And I think it's a really great collaboration. It's been a chance for us to showcase our work, also to highlight the critical issues that we do have to address, to put things like adaptation and resilience and the just transition on the international stage, and to obviously bring forth a South African perspective. So I'll take you through a little bit about the partnership and some of the very practical bits and pieces about the COP Pavilion for those of you who will be attending or have an interest in this area. Thank you. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of the actual partnership, if we move on, we have an MOU that's been in place for 7 years. I think it's been, again, a fantastic collaboration between business and government. So the NBI is a not-for-profit organization, but we do have members, and we've facilitated the work of our members collaborating with government and the DFFE in hosting our pavilion, as I say, for a 7-year period. We're very thankful to the sponsors of this work. So the private sector has really stepped up to support the pavilion over a number of years. This year, we have a number of headline sponsors, if I may just mention them briefly. We have Old Mutual, we have the PCC, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the IDC, 91, Exaro, Polyco, Anglo-American, Eskom, Naspers, SUSO, the Minerals Council of South Africa, and Norton Rose Fulbright. So those are COP Pavilion sponsors for 2024. In terms of delivery, I mean, as I think you probably are aware, this is not just about a pavilion space. There is a whole process that happens, obviously, of securing the space and the design build, but it's also about the messaging, it's about the communication at the event. Critically, it's about the event schedule. So what topics and what key elements are we driving at the pavilion as well? And an enormous amount of work that goes into this in collaboration between business and government over, as you can see, really like a 6-month period. And just to thank you also to the NBI team, who, as you know, do a huge amount of work in this space and the support we get from DFFE in making this a reality every year. If we move on, obviously, we're moving very closely to final preparation, as you can imagine. Our core team leaves next week. So just to give you a sense of what the space is, as you know, this year's COP29 is a slightly smaller COP. We think our pavilion will suit that sort of more intimate space. It'll have a very nice South African feel. But just to give you an idea of the COP pavilion space, we're obviously located in the blue zone. So if you look at this sort of map, towards the bottom of the Olympic Stadium is the pavilion space. It sort of looks like a sort of a zigzag effect. That rectangular space is where all the global pavilions will be housed, including the South Africa pavilion. Just to give you a sense, we're quite well positioned, I think, in the pavilion space because we are quite close to the negotiation and plenary entrance and exit. We're also very well located close to the coffee shop, which is a specific request that I made, which we're very happy about. Just to give you a sense for those of you attending in person, we've always made it a kind of a hybrid space in terms of the multifunctional space that the pavilion is. So it's also a place for networking and relationship building between the South African delegation and others, but also South Africa and the international stage, as we'll come to a bit later on. So we have obviously our main sort of event space at the top. That's a 30-seater space where we have all the events, where there will be about 50 events that will be housed this year in just 2 weeks. Then we have a meeting space as well, so we can have actual meetings on the go throughout. And then there are sort of tables and chairs for people to, I guess, have a small timeout or have a quick informal meeting as well as communications that will be placed across the various walls, which I think you'll see, if I'm not mistaken, on the next slide. Now, this is not a sophisticated depiction. This is to give you an idea. Obviously, we have the flag, we have the crest, we have all the various COP sponsors. We will also have a TV screen that displays key content and videos, what is being done to address climate change, both mitigation and adaptation in South Africa, as well as some really useful infographics which have been developed to sort of tell the South African story. We've done this for many years, and I think it really helps to understand, like, what are we doing as a country? I think, before we had the pavilion space, we were not able to articulate, obviously, what we've done, our successes. As many of you know, we launched the JET at a previous COP. We've launched the JET IP at a previous COP. So this has really been like a very, very important landing base and showcasing space where we've actually been shown pivotal moments on our climate journey as well. If we move to the next slide, just to give you a sense of how the branding will look, we obviously draw in a whole bunch of communication specialists. We have PR specialists who help us. Brand SA has helped us on a number of occasions. Obviously representing this is a Republic of South Africa initiative. This is very much Team South Africa. And of course, recognizing the corporate sponsors involved at the same time. Do not worry, this is not what the infographics, do not all get put 4 on a slide. This is just to give you an idea of what 4 on a slide might look like. So each of these infographics is a separate, I think A0 probably, very large, almost like poster, and these are strategically located across the pavilion space. So what are they talking about? They're talking about our investment need in terms of what we need to invest to achieve the just transition in the country. They talk a bit about our skills requirements, the employment opportunities in the just transition. So on the one hand, it's what kind of green skills do we need, but also what skills demand is emergent that we can take advantage of as we look to localize and diversify our economy. Where we are actually already starting to invest in low carbon businesses. So the areas of work we run an accelerator that's actually investing in low carbon businesses in South Africa as we speak. And then very importantly, the Mpumalanga just transition and the work that's underway there and their pathway to achieving the just transition in that province. So those are the sort of themes we have for this year, which I think are quite nice. And these will be located across the pavilion space. For those of you attending in person, I think the first thing I have to say is that this will not be a hybrid function. So in some cases, we have live streamed all the events effectively across the world. This will be an in-person event only. I just have to stress that. But for those of you attending, along with the many other sort of thousands of people who will be attending in person, this year they will be using headsets just to manage noise and I guess ambient noise particularly, but it's often, it's a fairly common practice in international conferences these days, but just to alert you to the fact that that will be provided and we will have spare headsets available. And I think just quickly on the actual event days, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but we've tried to align the event schedule with the thematic days of COP itself. And I think this has worked quite well. So obviously we move from the opening and the Leaders Summit to key days like finance and investment, energy, science and technology. Sunday, the November 17th is a rest day, and then moves on to quite often more adaptation and resilience related themes as well. So you'll see food, agriculture and water, nature and biodiversity, for example, also listed there, gender equality. And so I think the schedule reflects that quite well, the SA Pavilion schedule, in terms of the themes for the overall COP. We don't want to take you through the whole event schedule, but this is just to give you an idea of the number and I guess high profile nature of the organizations who will be hosting events at the SA Pavilion. And also just to highlight that this is not just South Africa. As mentioned, it includes a whole bunch of international organizations. But just to give you an idea, I mean, obviously the CSIR, DBSA are doing work there. There are a number of groups from Mpumalanga who will be hosting events there as well. ESCOM, the IDC. We have our international partners, the B Team, the Women Business Coalition and BSR, doing a number of events. There are a number of major international organizations like IUCN and IMWI that are having events as well. The UN High-Level Climate Champions will be having sessions, African Climate Foundation, etc. So SALGA and many others. So I think, if you are attending, I've seen the schedule in detail. I think it would be a really good showcase of work we are doing, our investment opportunities, our resilience requirements, and also, I guess, our SA Inc. needs, if I can put it that way. In terms of messaging through the COP that we've tried to put forward, I think there's quite good alignment with what we've heard earlier in the session today. And obviously we work to align closely with what government has said, but really focusing on how we can achieve a thriving, sustainable and competitive economy in the context of our significant social challenges, as we're all very much aware. And so the just transition is a theme that has run through the COP Pavilion, I think, almost since we started hosting an SA Pavilion a number of years ago. If we can move on, just to give you a slightly different flavor, I mean, one of the first things we've said outright is, we cannot obviously achieve a just transition unless we address our climate vulnerability and our developmental challenges. I think we all understand that. But also, secondly, that business realizes that it has a critical role to play. We know business is an innovator, an investor, an implementer. They have a significant role to play in both mitigation and adaptation. And certainly we've worked with our members for more than a decade to build their capacity to implement on climate change and to showcase this work internationally. But we also think that there's a need to obviously have a systems approach to the just transition, that if we don't have a strong, capable state, if we don't have functioning ecosystems, just for example, it will be difficult to achieve the just transition. So, institutional capacity and good governance in a way underpins all of our work and all of South Africa's developmental needs. So recognizing that role as well. Sorry, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going quickly if you hadn't noticed. If we can move on to the next slide. That obviously critically partnerships are essential, civil society, business, labor, and government. We're certainly involved in a number of those partnerships. A number of those partnerships will be showcased in the event schedule that I mentioned earlier. Of course, we have to unlock finance. This is about unlocking various forms of finance. I think the point around quality finance was really good. It won't all be grants. We will have to obviously look at concessional debt, equity, etc., but really about unlocking finance is a critical part of all this. And I guess we also don't want to forget that we can move from risk to opportunity or from risk to value, that there is economic value we can unlock in the green economy, that we can diversify in certain areas and localize in certain areas, as will be showcased a number of initiatives in that regard at the pavilion itself. And then lastly, just on logistics for those of you attending, I assume you would have booked your accommodation and flights by now and your e-visas, but we won't even go there. But assuming you're all prepared, I think the COP Pavilion they're doing a really good job, the COP organizers, around thinking about transport as well. So just to highlight, there will be free metro and conference uses for all registered COP participants. So you can actually get, there'll be transport you can take to and from the pavilion from the major areas, the major hotel areas, back and forth to the COP Pavilion, starting at sort of 7 in the morning and 10:15 at night. In addition to free airport express buses from the airport to the main hotel areas. So if you're in one of those main hotel areas, you could probably rely on these shuttle services throughout the whole process. And there will be an app to support you in all of this, as I suppose we can't survive without apps these days. So that will probably help. And just a reminder that we will be that Block E, the pavilion space, with obviously the negotiation space is the actual Baku Olympic Stadium in the middle there, Block C. I think just as we sort of close off, we've obviously seen the pavilion used in the country as a major way to galvanize support, leadership for climate change issues in the country. I think this is another opportunity for us to do the same, to showcase that we are implementing, but there are serious challenges that we have to address, that we need to obviously ensure that a just transition can be achieved in our country. But of course, it is an opportunity also to mobilize finance. We've seen that in the past. We hope to obviously mobilize more finance. As we've heard today, this is a finance COP, and obviously our long-term goals around finance. Hopefully this will be part of that puzzle. And I think, let me just close by just thanking everybody, for those who will be attending COP. Thank you for those who are supporting COP. Thank you to the DFE for our MOU and the support you provided over a number of years. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McNamara, for trying to push so quickly. We do apologize for putting a little bit of pressure on you. It's just that time is not on our side. We've come to the end of our program today. Before we conclude, I would just like to share these email addresses. I know that earlier there were commitments during the Q&A for people to send through any questions and queries and comments or any sort of inputs. You can send through to these email addresses that you're seeing now on the screen. All media, if there are any media-related questions, those can come through to me and Peter as well, also at DFFE, and we will assist. But all other questions to these two email addresses, please. And then just a final thing, for those who received parking tickets as they drove in, please, on your way out, you'll see there's a table and there are some colleagues there who can assist you with a stamp so that you don't have to pay for parking. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of our program for today. As we wrap, I just wanted to mention to Minister that, as the leader of this year's South African delegation, You and your team have been given the mandate and you've heard all the inputs from the different stakeholders. We wish you well and we will be following. For those who will not be attending COP, you can also follow the department's social media platforms. You can follow the PCC's social media platforms as well as the NBI social media platforms just to keep abreast of activities out at COP. As was mentioned earlier, we want to take everyone along this journey, so please do keep engaged on the topics, tweet, share what you can, email us, let's keep in touch. We want to make this work. Thank you for your cooperation in today's program, and we do apologize for running slightly over. Thank you.